German engineers took apart a captured B-29, then admitted they couldn't copy it. Date: 1944. Location: somewhere in the heart of Germany, a secret military workshop. A thick smoke rises from the ground, obscuring the industrial setting of metal and concrete. The sound of hammers striking metal is unmistakable. A dark and somber atmosphere forms as the camera moves closer to a giant war machine, a captured aircraft. In the distance, a massive silhouette takes shape on the fuselage of a B-29, Superfortress, still intact, resting in a Luftwaffe secret facility. Alongside it, a team of German engineers works tirelessly, radiating confidence. They have in their hands an enemy, the machine that symbolizes America's power. A German engineer, confident, looks over the structure of the B-29. He mutters to his colleagues, "We can replicate it. Nothing in this machine is beyond us." He speaks with a smile, believing they have finally found the secret to overcoming the enemy. But what he doesn't know is that this day, filled with arrogance, will mark the beginning of the greatest failure in German military engineering history. What they didn't know was that on that day they were witnessing the start of their own demise. 2. The birth of the monster. In 1942, the need for a strategic bomber capable of reaching the heart of Germany, or more precisely Japan, led American engineers to develop the B-29 Superfortress. The project didn't come without its difficulties. The challenges were immense: the need for high altitude, impressive range, and the ability to carry significant bomb payloads. Additionally, the demands for speed, efficiency, and long-range combat required technologies never before seen in the aviation industry. In the early tests, the B-29 proved to be a true monster of aviation. Its initial failures were no small matter. Engines that didn't work as expected, pressurization problems, and performance issues during takeoff. For many, the idea of building such an advanced machine seemed impossible. No one imagined that this apparent failure carried the seed of victory. Baptism by fire, initial defeat. Finally, in 1943, the B-29 was deployed to the battlefield, performing its first operational mission, the bombing of Tokyo. However, the flight was far from a celebration. When the bombers faced the mighty Japanese defenses, the B-29 performed disastrously. In its first combat test, the B-29 was vulnerable to enemy fire, with anti-aircraft guns hitting it with devastating precision. Field reports from that day described the aircraft as difficult to control, with persistent complaints from the crew about performance at higher altitudes. For the enemy, the B-29 appeared to be an easy target, more of a nightmare of engineering than a war machine. The field report of the day described it: "Flies like a brick." Confidence in the new model seemed to be shattered. But the story of a warrior is not written in its defeats, and the B-29 was no different. Over the course of the months, adjustments and modifications were made. The issues were faced with fierce determination. The B-29 gained a new life, becoming the strategic bomber it was always meant to be. Its pressurization system was improved, its bomb capacity was reinforced, and its range maximized. It became the plane that never should have worked, but was now ready to take on the world. At the same time, German engineers, with their own view of the project, began to dismantle the captured B-29s. They were trying to figure out what made the aircraft so effective. But what they couldn't predict was that while they were taking apart each piece, the complexity of the B-29 was astonishing. The fuselages, the control systems, the aerodynamic design, nothing was simple. It was an invention years ahead of any technology available to Germany at the time. Those engineers, with their confident faces, soon discovered that the impossible had been achieved. The escalation of terror. The Luftwaffe, attempting to build an equivalent to the B-29, began to realize the magnitude of their mistake. They couldn't replicate the systems of the B-29. The materials were superior, the mechanisms far too complex, and the technological innovations seemed endless. What seemed like a simple task now turned into a nightmare. As the German engineers desperately tried to understand how the machine worked, their perception began to shift. What they once thought could be easily copied now appeared to be a masterpiece of engineering, a work impossible to replicate. The cadence of the B-29's 8 engines sounded like thunder, and for the Germans, that sound represented the oncoming destruction. The pressure of not being able to replicate this American war machine began to take its toll. The doctrine of power. The B-29 wasn't just an aircraft, it was a symbol of adaptability, ingenuity, and overcoming adversity. It represented American supremacy in the production of war machines, reflecting the industrial strength and pragmatism of the United States in times of crisis. American engineers, who managed to adapt and modify the B-29 to overcome its initial flaws, understood that true victory was not in creating the perfect machine, but in creating one that could be improved according to the needs of the moment. This contrasted with the German mentality, which relied more on radical innovations and the concept of absolute strength, where any failure was a disgrace. War is not just about brute force, it's about endurance, adaptation, and ingenuity. The final judgment. Poetic closure. As the Americans began bombing key targets in Japanese territory, the B-29s became the most powerful weapon in history. For the Germans, who had tried to copy the machine and failed, the frustration was deep. They had underestimated the power of American engineering, and now they were forced to admit that their attempt to copy the B-29 had been a defeat in every sense. They laughed when they saw it for the first time. They stopped laughing when they realized the sound of laughter had merged with the thunder of defeat. The B-29 was not just a war machine. It had become the symbol of technological innovation that would change the course of the war. The thunder spoke, and the sky never belonged to them again. Final message. The story of the B-29 Superfortress is a lesson in adaptation, ingenuity, and the power of perseverance. What appeared to be an initial failure became the ultimate weapon against the enemy. For the German engineers, the attempt to copy the American machine was the reflection of a fatal error, underestimating the capacity for adaptation and innovation that the United States brought to the war. The B-29 symbolizes not just the power of technology, but the ability to learn and overcome adversity in a world at war.